Security has been tightened, of course, in Boston, in the US, and also in London ahead of the marathon next weekend. We're joined now by Suhasini Heather for more to take us through more of the sequence of events and where investigations stand. Suhasini?
All right, Amrita, in fact, we're looking at those pictures. Remember, the Boston Marathon is really an iconic event. It's one of the 6 big marathons around the world. 3 of those, of course, are there in the US. And those were the pictures yesterday at about 11 a.m. in Boston as the Boston Marathon took off. Look at those numbers. 23,000 people in all took part. Of course, thousands more were just spectators there. We certainly know that they represented about 96 nationalities. And remember, Boston, the Boston area here in the United States, home to more than 100 colleges and universities, so many Indian students in that area as well. If we're looking at that Google Earth map of just where it happened, Copley Plaza, the center of Boston. The first explosion here happened at about 2:50 in the afternoon there, Boston time. The second explosion 12 seconds later, and then once those first responders came in, once the police came into the area, they found 2 more bombs, and you can see where they were diffused in a controlled explosion just a short while away. I can tell you this is really the center of Boston. The Boston Public Library is in that area as well. These are now some of the aerial pictures from just after the blast. Of course, all flights were cancelled. Nobody was allowed to overfly after a little while. But really what we're looking at, that video, you know, that you were showing of Steve Silva. He's a producer with the Boston Globe who was right there at that time. And he was at the finish line getting pictures of people coming in, crossing over. Remember, about 17,000 people had crossed over by the time these blasts took place. And then that first explosion going off at the side, you were referring to that 8-year-old boy. He was actually standing near the finishing line waiting for his father to come in as well. And really some very, very tragic stories coming from there. Remember, the police is still staying very cautious on just what they think is responsible for that attack. What we do know is that they have one possible suspect who they are watching at a hospital right now. They have put out a lookout notice for a dark-skinned individual saying that he has a foreign accent. Also, that up from Boston in the town of Revere, we understand that so far they are in fact looking at one of the apartment buildings over there. More of those aerial shots showing just how quickly those first responders came into the scene. Remember, this area was packed. Thousands and thousands of people you're seeing lining Boston streets right over there, and some horrific pictures. And I can tell you, it's been amateur video that's been coming in, stills coming in, everyone contributing. And now the FBI is in fact collating a lot of this very evidence and looking at just what it'll lead to. What we know is that the FBI is treating it as a terror attack. That's what the FBI is in there for. They're saying the blasts were coordinated. Remember those 2 unexploded bombs that were found as well, all expected to detonate in a short period of time. Doctors saying large number of injuries, more than 144 people wounded in this particular attack. And what we do know is that certainly from past explosions, that means that it was in fact a very powerful explosion that has hit Boston. Both of those explosions, in fact. Doctors also at those hospitals telling us that most of them were lower limb injuries, and that they have been extracting ball bearings from the victims. Again, an indicator really that those explosions were calculated to have the maximum amount of damage. And also finally, as we said, the FBI really treating this as a terror attack already, although remaining very cautious about just what could have caused it. Also talking about the fact that the detonation was timed 4 hours into the marathon and that maximum numbers were expected to have crossed at that time. Remember, 17,000 people had crossed already, but it was that critical period about 4 hours into the marathon at about 2:50, just before 3 p.m. that they were expecting the maximum number of crowds at that area. They're looking at all of that. They're also looking to tighten security at other sporting events. There is the London Marathon this weekend, and the UK has already ordered a full review of security arrangements for that.
Joined by the national security analyst for both First Post and for CNN IBN, Praveen Swamy, joining us. Praveen, you know,
what we've seen play out so far really seems to have a lot of lessons that India can learn from. Firstly, from the disaster management that we saw and the state response as well. What do you have to say about that?
Well, the first thing is, the first and obvious lesson is that the police you saw responding so well to the crisis today had trained and rehearsed for these kinds of eventualities every year, every few months. And that training paid off. In India, we have an overstretched, undertrained, underfunded police force that just doesn't rehearse or practice for these things. When was the last time, after all, that any of us were involved in a terrorist drill? And you see the results in the fact in how many lives have been saved. If you get victims of a bomb blast into hospital in the first 30 minutes after the incident, their chances of living go up incrementally. In India, sadly, we're generally not able to do that, and the number of fatalities therefore go up. So a real learning episode for Indian police forces, for emergency service responders, and also for the media, which we saw in Boston didn't trample on the crime scene, didn't intrude anywhere.
They were quite calm and collected. That's been commented on. People in Boston also opening their homes to those in need. But to talk, apart from the emergency first response, just to talk about who could possibly be behind this. We know, of course, Praveen, that investigations are at a very early stage. US authorities also playing it close to the chest. So far, the Pakistani Taliban has said it's not behind this.
Well, we shouldn't take any claims of responsibility or denial seriously at this point. And yes, of course, these are very early days. We can't say. We know it's a terrorist attack, but unfortunately, in America, there are many groups who have shown the potential to carry out similar strikes. We know there have been 63 plots since 9/11 involving homegrown jihadists of various kinds. What's less well known is that there have been more than 300 killings in the same period and over 1,000 plots involving neo-Nazis and white supremacists of various kinds, many of whom hate Barack Obama and may have been seeking to make a point. So the list of perpetrators is at this stage a long one. It could simply be a crazy person with a personal grudge. We don't know, and investigators will in coming days and weeks be sifting through the evidence to see which of these possibilities is borne out by the evidence.
Right, and of course investigators really still looking at what type of a terror attack this is exactly, but you know, also this entire episode showing you how vulnerable every country, every place can be to terrorism.
We don't want to push that too far. I mean, the United States hasn't had a major terrorist attack since 9/11, and that's because, like other Western countries, it's made very significant investments in counterterrorism technology and capacity. Remember, as I just said, they've had 63 jihadist plots alone, but haven't had killings in any of those plots.
Sure.
So again, a lesson for us to learn about system, discipline, capacity building. Which are things we've been extremely poor at in this country, despite facing a far worse problem than the United States.